Do you want to know how to discipline a teenager with anxiety? I'm Nicholeen Peck, and I've disciplined teenagers with anxiety before. In fact, I did therapeutic treatment care for troubled teens for many years. I've also raised 4 children of my own to adulthood, and I teach all over the world about parenting, good communication, how to build strong family bonds, child development, and education, all through the lens of the principle self-government. And self-government is a key to working on anxiety. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety and what we're dealing with, and then we're going to talk about how to set up a plan for success and how to have consistent follow-ups with our teens so that they can see themselves making progress. So let's talk a little bit about anxiety and what's happening there. So when we have anxiety, it's really a state of stress in the brain. The cortisol is firing and is putting a lot of your thoughts on a loop. So you start to ruminate on certain things. Basically, you're not dropping the subject on things that are not healthy to hold on to, right? So there are some thoughts, some problems that we have to think about them for a while. We have to focus in to try to solve a problem. And then there's some problems that if we focus in, it becomes more of a problem than if we just said, okay, I can't think about that anymore. And the person with anxiety has a hard time differentiating between when it's a problem that they should be focusing on and when it's one of those that they are over-focusing on and it might be creating more of a problem. And so you've got to talk to them about that. Teach them what is rumination. That's when you just keep thinking it again and again. It's on a loop. It's like it won't go away. Teach them what the signs are to their anxiety, right? So talk to them about, well, what do you feel like in your body when you're anxious? Do you get tight in your chest? Does your jaw get tight? Do you clench your fists? What's the type of thought that's going on inside your own head? You have to be able to isolate those things in order to actually be able to make a change. So when a person is dealing with anxiety, oftentimes they end up in a place where they feel stuck. And this is because all of the chemicals have loaded to a point that now the dopamine is even firing, telling them this is the way to handle your problem. This is the way to handle your problem. And it's so overloading, so overwhelming that they just get to a point sometimes where they give up. And this is where people actually notice the anxiety, is when the person's like, I can't. No, I can't do that. I never can do that. I'm giving up, right? Or I can't go into that social situation. No, that's not going to be safe. And they're then very, very rigid. And it's because that's the only place they were able to come to in the problem solving in their brains when they overly focused on it. The solution was, I'm not safe. And so in order to keep myself safe, I'm going to stay away from all of it. But the irony is they don't understand that when they pull themselves away from everything all the time, they're actually never safe. They're always in a place of feeling fragile, feeling worried, and like things are going to make their lives horrible. They're also under the illusion that they can control their safety. They can't. Nobody can control their own safety completely except for through their own thought processes. But if they're trying to control everything around them, every other person and all the moving objects, they'll never feel safe. Because you can't control that many things around you. Everyone else has choices. And there's just rhythms and patterns to life that make it so that you don't get to have control. The only part you can control is what's going on the inside. That's where you choose to feel safe. They usually get to a place where they just reject movement, and that's their choice they've made on the inside, but they don't know. They really don't feel like they'll be safe for the future, because how can you pick that always? You can't. So let's talk about what to do and how to plan for success. If you've already subscribed to this channel, then you know we do a lot of proactive planning here, because a big part of learning self-government is being proactive. Choosing ahead of time what you want to do and the direction that you're moving forward so that you can actually be more successful in the minute. Now, the person with anxiety needs planning. Okay, they have a loop. They have a fast track in the brain where they get stuck on that anxiety pattern, and they need to know how to get off of it before they're in the moment when they're on it. So it's super important to have some conversations with your teen about what you've noticed is going on. So I call this having a parent counseling session. Sit down with your teen and say, okay, so I've noticed that anxiety seems to be getting in the way of your quality of life. And I know that everybody has anxieties that we all deal with. Every person has anxieties. Some people have anxieties about, staying up too late. Some people have anxieties about waking up in the morning. Some people have anxieties about eating certain vegetables or speaking in front of people or whatever. There's all kinds of anxieties that people have. Anxieties of roller coasters or high places. Pick your anxiety. We've all had to overcome something somewhere along the way. But what's happened with the person that has higher levels of anxiety is that they have trained their brain to focus in on that anxiety. And so it becomes more acute, more debilitating, and it becomes more of a habit for them. So they have to train themselves to identify what's going on, to expose it to themselves so that they can potentially break that thought habit that has formed within them. They also might have been given a little bit too much control over their surroundings. So sometimes people that are coddled end up having higher levels of anxiety because they never fell down and got scraped and had a crash on their bicycle and broken arm or whatever. They never had those hard things happen. They can only imagine them happening because they know they've happened to other people, but because they were too protected, then they feel like they have to always stay protected. So that's a factor. Keep that in mind. Raising a strong, emotionally strong, resilient, anti-fragile person means they're going to have some hard knocks along the way. Okay, that's just part of life. So in this conversation where you say, I think it's become a problem, the anxiety is starting to take over too much, we've got to handle this. Let's make a plan for it. Why do you think it's becoming a habit at this point? The person might be like, I guess I never thought of it as a habit, Maybe it's because I just want to feel safe, or I don't feel safe a lot of the time, or something. Okay, acknowledge that, talk about it, and then you might challenge, say, okay, so what are the thoughts that you have when you think you're not safe? Well, they might say, well, that I'm not safe doing that I've never done it before, and so it's too scary, or I could fall, or whatever it is that the situation might be. Then you could say, well, what if you challenged that thought and said, have I ever done anything else that's scary? Hopefully the answer is yes, right? Because they've overcome other anxieties. Or how will I know if I can do it if I never try? I have to actually try. And is it okay to try and fail sometimes before you're successful at something? Yes. The answer to that question is yes. So if you can teach them some of those types of thoughts to say in their mind, that hey, just going out and talking to a person, even if that person didn't like me, was so brave. And I want to develop a habit of being brave. Okay, that's great then. Right? So teach the person what thoughts to think in the moment when they come. So then what you do is you plan for the future and you say, okay, so we're going to have a moment where we're going to have to step out of our comfort zone, which means we're going to have to work on thinking our new thought during this time. And it's a no answer to not engage socially. You have to. And if you don't, then you'll be corrected. Because we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to make it so that you have to take the steps and do it. Now, what they're really doing is following an instruction. So if you've been teaching self-government at your house, then you know there's 4 basic skills of self-government that are kind of the foundation for a lot of the teaching and skills that I teach, which I can never get to on this channel completely. But one of those basic ones is following instructions. So in order for them to step out of a comfort zone, they might have to follow your instructions, which there's 5 steps to that, okay? And then in order for them to make themselves step out of a comfort zone, sometimes they might have to follow their own instructions. They might have to say, no, you can do it. You've got to take the step forward and open your mouth and say this thing or make eye contact with somebody. They might have to tell themselves an instruction and follow through. That's what a self-governed person does, is they're able to give themselves instructions and no answers and correct themselves and disagree better and more appropriately with other people. So those are all things that they can do on their own if they are a self-governing person. We want to give them that strength. So I would plan for that and then let them know that you will help them by correcting them and maybe even praising them and having positive consequences for when they do the right thing. So good should equal good, bad should equal bad, right? So there should be positive consequences, at least at first, for maybe a couple of weeks or so when you're working on stepping out of the comfort zone and overcoming that thought process that's getting in the way and creating more of that anxiety. Now, sometimes a person has such high levels of anxiety that they go completely out of instructional control. They become dysregulated because they start feeding into their anxiety so much and they go back into that back brain, and suddenly they just can't think anymore. It becomes so incredibly overwhelming. There are things that you can do about that. I'd like to talk about what we can do about all the different types of behaviors in my next video, which is called How to Discipline a Child. So click on the link to that video next. I'll see you there.